Hello everyone, I'm Jacqui Jones, founder of Way We Do. Welcome to our training session, the Productivity Trifecta, Safety, Quality and Delivery, with Malcolm Campbell, a lead time reduction specialist based in Brisbane, Australia. Today we're going to discuss if it is possible to triple productivity in your business. Businesses and not-for-profit organisations use Way We Do for a variety of reasons. One of those reasons is to create a quality management system, allowing them to document their workflow and work instructions for their teams to deliver products and services consistently to customers. Today's training session will introduce you to concepts about safety, quality and delivery that you may or may not have heard of before. These are proven methods used in thousands of companies around the world. Malcolm Campbell has a great ability to demystify complex topics in the world of process engineering. After all, his business name is KISS Operations Consulting, with KISS, K-I-S, standing for Keep It Simple. Malcolm has re-engineered processes in manufacturing and retail businesses in the area of safety, quality management and on-time delivery. The same principles are used across every industry sector, so they can be applied to your business too. His objective is to reduce the time it takes to deliver products and services to customers. This in turn lowers cost, it reduces customer complaints, reduces customer churn and ensures that the end product is delivered at a quality standard that your customers love. I'm looking forward to today's training session and I encourage you to ask questions throughout the session by entering them into the chat field on screen, and we will answer these at the end of the session. Also, Malcolm has kindly provided a special offer to Way We Do subscribers, which will be announced towards the end of the session. This offer is limited and is only available on a first-come, first-served basis, so make sure you hang around for that. This session is being recorded, so everyone who registered will receive access to the video and will be sent out to you within the next 1 to 2 days. I will now hand you across to Malcolm. So welcome, Malcolm, and thank you for providing your expertise today.
Thank you very much, Jacqui, and welcome listeners. We're going to talk about productivity not from the point of view of the actual operation itself, but all the bits that go in and around the operation. So we've got 3 key areas that we're going to discuss today, being safety, quality management and delivery on time. And for each of these topics we're going to have a brief look at symptoms, cost to the business and what you can actually do to help improve the situation. As Jacqui said, there'll be some questions and answers at the end. So the first one is safety. For me, safety is a condition of play. It's a non-negotiable. If you can't perform your work safely, then you simply shouldn't do it. It's a moral responsibility. Aside from that, if you do things safely, you will generally find that you're actually doing them more efficiently. The effort that you go to in order to make something safe almost always ends up making it easier and consequently more efficient. You're never too small to work safely, and it's a very important aspect of what you do. Symptoms of major accidents are fairly obvious. There'll be blood on the floor, there'll be people screaming, there could be someone who's just taken their thumb off, which happened to a chap 2 days ago. Symptoms of more minor accidents are often hidden. You don't always find out about the person who's run off to get a band-aid to stick on their finger. If you have something like this, then you not only lose the productivity of the individual while they go and do that, but also the first aider. Then there's all the discussion about, oh, what happened to you? How did that happen? Oh, wow, geez whiz. Before you know it, you've actually lost quite a bit of time. Particularly if you're running a cell where each operation is dependent on the other, you may in fact stop the entire cell while someone goes off to get attended to. So there's a lot of hidden costs when you try and understand or quantify what the savings are. It can be difficult because how do you put a cost on the event that didn't happen? Suffice to say, it's still very important and will make a big difference to your bottom line at the end of the year. there's not just the time that you lose and capacity is lost, but then there's also the medical bills, potential litigation, and then you get a consultant to come in and dig you out of the trouble when in fact it would have been a whole lot cheaper, easier and less traumatic to get the consultant in the front end to avoid the problems. So we might talk about what you can do about it. And you hear lots of people will talk about lag indicators and all their measures and so forth. What I'm interested in is how you avoid the incident occurring in the first place. And really what you're talking about there is getting the culture right. Here on to the, my distraction, don't mind me. It's what you can do that is going to actually change people's behaviour. So we talk about safe act observations, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail on the next slide. The engagement of safety committees, not just putting problem people there to shut them up, but to actually put people who are interested and engaged in making improvements. Another critical aspect is the senior management Gemba walk. Well, Gemba is simply the location where the work takes place, and that could be the photocopier, it could be the factory floor, it could be the hospital bed, wherever the work is taking place. It's critical that the senior management is seen to be interested and engaged in what's going on, and otherwise you don't get the credibility. Another very powerful tool is a visual dashboard. A set of KPIs up on the board that's filled out by employees in real time or daily as appropriate, where they indicate how well or otherwise they're going. And it's common to use red-green indicators for good, bad, and the psychological effect of having to go and write a red mark against an area that you're responsible for tends to be quite a good motivator for action. So I want to talk about safe act observations. These are intended to be a positive experience where you're increasing the level of, you're just putting safety front of mind. You're trying to get people to actually think about what's going on around them. A SAO consists of an individual being observed by other individuals while they are doing their work. Initially that tends to be senior people doing the observing, but in time it's operators watching operators. And the discussion is not what you're doing wrong, but it's about all the things you're doing right. Obviously if there is something that's not so good, you then try and gain some commitment for improvement. But the whole experience is intended to be a positive experience. It's not a slap on the knuckles. It's a well done, keep it up, and here's what else you can do type of thing, and it's a support thing. So it's putting safety front of mind. That's the point. Management must be committed, and they must be seen to be committed, and they must be felt to be committed, and that will only happen through an exercise of persistence. You've just got to keep going and going and going. If management is around the operation, be they in a factory or be they in an office, but if they're talking about safety on a regular basis, then people start to believe that it's actually important. It could be as simple as you hanging onto the handrail while you're walking up the stairs. There was one place that I worked for a little while, and we had 3 people fall down the stairs at different times in the office. So we put up a sign that said, please hold the handrail when you walk up and down the stairs. It's fair to say that we got a lot of grief for that, but we also found that people stopped falling down the stairs. It's interesting. So we've got a little quiz for you. So here's a question, and then I'll hand back to Jacqui to take some answers. What would you do if you were walking around a factory floor and your employee pulled you up as the manager of the business and said, hey, you're not wearing your safety glasses, it's not good enough? What would you do?
Okay, everyone, in the chat box on screens, which should be on your screen, you'll be able to answer or provide some of your answers there. So what would you do if your employee finds you on the workshop floor and says, hey, you're not wearing your safety glasses? What would you do? What would you say to them? Okay, I think...
You just let me know when you want me to keep going.
Yeah, I think we have some shy people. They're not answering, providing feedback. That's okay. So how about Malcolm, you, what would you do? So if someone said to you, hey, you're not wearing your safety glasses and you're the manager or the CEO of the company?
Right. Well, this is something that has in fact happened to me on more than one occasion. And my reaction is one of thanking them wholeheartedly for caring enough to actually point it out. It's also a very positive sign that the individual feels sufficiently comfortable with me as a manager that they're prepared to challenge me on something like that, and also that they believe that I'm sufficiently committed to the rhetoric I've been carrying on with about safety that I would take the matter seriously. And it reinforces the commitment I've got, it reinforces the relationship and the care, and it's very powerful. But the absolute worst thing you can do is to ignore it or to tell the person just get back to work. That's extremely counterproductive.
And I think in some situations, some managers or like a CEO of a company may be taken back by an employee saying something like that to them, and they may brush it off. But what you're saying, that's not a good thing to do, and as you said, it's counterproductive.
Well, it is, and I have in fact witnessed that firsthand when a managing director walked through and was pulled up for exactly that, and he wasn't very impressed at all. And you know, the comment came back to me directly afterwards and said, "Well, we know that you're serious about safety, but he's not."
Yes.
And that was the end of the comment.
Yes.
So we've got a little case study there, Jacqui, on the next slide. So this was an event that took place quite some time ago, but this is a first-hand experience that I wanted to share with you all today. I was running a factory that had about 100 people in it across 3 shifts, and the management of the day was not prepared to make it an enforceable exercise in wearing safety glasses, although they obviously supported it. So I engaged the assistance of my leading hands to support the exercise, who reluctantly did. Got all the standard excuses, oh, we've done it this way for years, we've never had to wear them in the past, why should we do it now, rah, rah, rah. I said, just wear them. The leading hand, one in particular, who was perhaps the single best operator in that entire factory. He was a very smart guy, very committed guy. And he came to me on this day and he had a gouge that started on his forehead and that went towards his nose. It stopped when it got to his eye and started again on his nose. He then presented to me his safety glasses, which had a great big scratch right through the middle of one eye. And he said with a rather sheepish look, I think I need a new set of glasses. And I looked him straight back and said, mate, I have just saved your eye. Suffice to say, I never had any more problems in that particular factory with getting people to wear safety glasses. Sometimes you simply have to force the issue with safety because it's just too important not to. Mm-hmm. You can imagine the costs that would have been associated with a leading hand of a critical area of the factory losing an eye and having unknown amounts of time away from work, not to mention all the human cost. Right, so we're going to move on to quality management now, which is the second issue here. Now, quality, a lot of people when you say quality, they think about the quality of product. What I'm talking about today is the quality of process. By definition, the quality process is a predictable and repeatable process. So you're going to get predictable, repeatable outcomes. The way to do this is, incidentally, is the foundation for improvement, because once you have a predictable and repeatable outcome, you know what you're going to get. You can then make adjustments to that to better align your result with what you would like to get. And this is where quality management systems come into their own, and this is where the way we do product becomes invaluable as a way of helping manage that process. So if you think about reworks occur because you haven't managed to get your product right the first time. The reason you haven't got the product right the time, many people will tell you, is, oh, it's human error, someone made a mistake. The moment you hear somebody say, oh, it was just human error, you know you have a massive opportunity for improvement. That's because people are human. Humans make mistakes. You put a bunch of people in a room and you leave them there all day, day after day, you are going to get a substantial number of mistakes occur. And to just accept this as being human error is to close off your mind to making any effort towards actually improving your process. So reworks, obviously, you pick it up in-house. Returns are one step worse again because no one's picked it up until it's got out to the customer. you've now got irate customers, you've got loss of face for the business, you've got all the additional expense of shipping stuff back, having to rework it, interrupt production to rework it, etc. So this becomes a very costly exercise. So while people may think that having a quality management system is in fact expensive, what you've got to look at is what the cost of not having a quality management system is. Many customers won't tell you that they've got a problem, they'll just work around. They may do this because they think you won't care, or because they need the product you've just supplied and they need it now and they don't have time to wait while you replace it. Very often they won't bother telling you, they just won't deal with you anymore, or they'll tell everyone they know that you're rubbish, and you get these workarounds. And it's quite a neat little picture there of a workaround. So, cost to the business. Some of these costs are fairly obvious, and again, in many cases hard to quantify. How do you quantify the cost of an increased frustration that you get both within your customers and also your own staff? The majority of your staff want to do the right thing, they want to do a good job, and they want to look after the business. There are, of course, exceptions. But how do you measure the increase in frustration that they feel and the run-on effects from that? It's a challenging one, but it's a very real situation. So what do we do about it? Well, the obvious thing we need to do is to have a quality management system. What is that, I hear you ask? So glad you asked. Quality management system is made up of a bunch of things that you can see there on the screen. So your policies and procedures, your overarching, bigger picture things. A procedure tells you what the steps are that you need to go through. It does not tell you how to do it or how to make sure that it stays on track. It just tells you what it is you need to go through. So it says open the door, walk through, close the door. It doesn't tell you how to turn the handle. Process controls ensure that you don't mess it up in the process. The work instruction is where you find out how you actually do it, and that works in closely with standard work. So having standardized what the steps are and the work instruction details how you do it, the process controls then ensure that you follow that. What we find is that if you have a process that somebody's following, maybe it's how you follow up a debtor, or maybe it's how you do a cycle count, there's a set of steps you need to go through. And if the person doing that only does it from time to time, they'll be quite happy to pull out the work instruction and follow it through to make sure that they get it right. If, however, it's something they do on a daily basis, they're not going to pull the work instruction out every time because they feel, in their mind, they already know how to do it. This is where you can get problems, and that's where the process controls kick in. The process controls ensure that the work instruction is followed and that all the key points of the work instruction are not missed. You've got three basic types of process control you can have. There's error proofing, which engineers the problem out, makes it impossible. Control plans, which is something you fill out every time you go through the process. And failing all of that, the only other option you have is a set of visual rules that you have to train people on, and then you have to be continually going back to make sure it doesn't just become wallpaper. And there's a number, if we have more time I could go into some examples of what all of those are. I think we don't quite have enough time for that today. So I was going to talk a little bit more about some standard work, which is, oh sorry, you've got an extra, yep, the quality management triangle that's there just summarises in a pictorial form what I was just talking about, and it's a pyramid where you have the policies right at the top. Might be a safety policy, a quality policy, productivity policy. Supporting that is the series of procedures and so forth. Process controls hold it together. The work instructions tell you how to do it. The skills matrix summarises the skills that you need in order to complete the tasks in the work instruction, and from the skills matrix you have a gap analysis which determines your training program requirements. And that's what that slide is just summarising. The standard work is key to all of this. If you think about someone shooting at a target, if the shots are going all over the place, you've got no real control, and if you start making improvements, you're really not going to know whether you've made any improvement or not because the end result is so scattered. Once you get the precision in place by using the standard work so it's done the same way every time, you get a much tighter bunch of results. And then you, having got this nice little tight grouping, you're able to make adjustments that realign the result you're getting with the result you'd like to get. So standard work is a critical first step to getting, to setting you up for some continuous improvement. So we've got another quiz there, Jacqui, if you'd like to talk to that.
Okay, great. I'm just going to put that on screen for you to see. Here we go.
Don't be shy, people, because it's very common for you to have most, if not all, of these issues in your business. It's very, very common.
Okay, so I have some people providing results here, and the results are coming through, and it's showing that 67% of people have rework issues, 67% have return customer or product or service returns issues, 50% workarounds, and 67% poor customer service. So it looks like the participants in the call today, they are experiencing all of those particular issues. So I'll just...
Which is not at all surprising, and does also suggest that some work on the quality management system that you've got can in fact have a lot of potential advantage for your businesses. Again, the way we do product is a very good starting point, an excellent way of holding all of that together and giving it some structure so that it all flows. I know there's been some development work that's ongoing. There's been some checklists developed just recently, and there's a place where checklists can be very valuable also. They fit in under the control plan banner, and if you've not already looked at that, I can recommend that to you. Now we've got a case study. I guess the point of this example is that it doesn't necessarily need to be a difficult or expensive change to have a dramatic impact. This particular customer was supplying product interstate on a daily basis. It was a big, ugly product. The product would be stretch wrapped onto a pallet and all tightly strapped up, and when it got to the other end it would be all damaged. And what the company was finding was that more loads than not were in fact arriving damaged. A number of theories were put out there, and some of the brains trust went out and started looking at inflatable bags to put between product on the back of the truck and all this sort of nonsense. These were going to be expensive, complicated exercises, and then we had to work out how we were going to get the bags back and so forth. So we went out and had a look. We went to the Gemba to see what was actually going on. And it became obvious very quickly that there was a fairly fundamental piece missing in our standard work. Because while we were doing all this work to strap the product to the pallet was just being put in the back of the truck, and the sides were then added to the truck without the pallet actually being strapped down onto the truck, which I would have thought was obvious. However, it clearly wasn't. I spoke to the trike driver. I said, "What's going on with that?" He says, "It's fine. It's not going to fall out. The sides are on." I said, "Yes, but it's going to all bang around against each other in there." Anyway, he didn't really like this because it represented a bit of extra work for him and it was going to slow him down. But I explained to him that either he strapped them down or he wouldn't be our contractor any longer. He strapped them down, and surprise, surprise, overnight our quality issue all but disappeared completely. It didn't really cost anybody very much at all to put a couple of extra straps through the pallets to tie them to the back of the truck, but it made a massive difference. That became the new standard work, and the new standard work was then captured so that regardless of who was loading the truck, that new process would be included. Right, so we're going to move on now to delivery and fast delivery. Jacqui mentioned at the front end that I'm a lead time reduction specialist. The reason that I focus on lead time reduction is twofold. One, the effort that it takes to reduce the lead time means that you drive a lot of waste out of your business that helps improve your productivity. And the other side of it is that when you deliver in a much shorter lead time, you give your customers much less time to figure out that they need something urgently. If you give them less time to realise it's urgent, they've got less time to ring you up and cause you all sorts of grief about getting their product earlier. So on the next slide there we talk about disruption, and this is what happens when a customer doesn't have what they think they need when they think they need it. And you all know what happens. Someone rings up, oh, but I need my product now, it's the end of the world if I don't get it. So you rush off into production and you beg for someone to help you, and eventually they interrupt their production and they push this aside and they slot that in, and before you know it, production's been completely turned into turmoil. The people all hate it and complain, and it's dubious whether the customer actually gets their product much faster or not. So cost to the business. Aside from the endless urgent orders from having long lead times and the disruption that causes, you've also got the frustration both by employees and by customers who are upset because they think they should have had it sooner. All of this flows over into dramatic increases in costs, decreases in efficiency, and a common solution that people work to is to put large amounts of stock into a warehouse in order to buffer against this. The introduction of some fairly simple lean manufacturing ideas can in fact have some dramatic differences to that. So the way we go through this solution, what you're seeing on the slide there is some standard lean talk. Define what value is to your customer. What you think is of value to your customer and what is actually of value to your customer are not always the same. And if you go building a product that is what you consider to be very high quality and wonderful and brilliant, and all they really wanted was something cheap and simple, you're not going to satisfy their needs. Having worked out what value is, you need to have a look at how you add that value. So there is value in, and again, taking a manufacturing example, there is value in putting the hole in the material. There is not value in going to find the drill and putting the thing in the vise in order to do the drilling. They're non-value adding activities. When you start to pull apart the exercise of what you're doing, this understanding of what value really is becomes very important. This applies in an office just as well as it does inside a manufacturing event. How many times have you got a form that's got to be signed off in 3 or 4 different places by 3 or 4 different people, and when you really stop and look at it and say, well, why is it in fact important that this individual signs off on that? And very often you find, well, it's really not important at all, but it's sat in their intro for 3 days waiting for them to look at it to do 5 minutes of a quick read over and then a sign off. So you've increased the lead time by 3 days for no real value at all. The next step we do is take these value-adding activities, we link them together so that the material, or the material could be the product that you're working on, or it could be the form you're filling out. We want that to flow. The next step is to then have it so that the customer actually pulls the product to them. The theory behind this will take longer than I've got time to explain now, but take my word for it, it makes a dramatic improvement. And the final and crucial step to all of this is continuous improvement. You need to be continually looking for better ways to do things, because if you're not, your competitors will, and then you'll go backwards by default, simply because you're not moving forwards. The slide there it talks about continuous improvement. It's critical. Having standardized the work so you're actually going to get the predictable, repeatable outcomes that I talked about before, you then want to improve it. You want to get better and better and better. No improvement means you go backwards. Now we've got another quiz there, Jacqui, on the next slide.
Yes, so how many times per week does your schedule get interrupted by urgent request or rework request? So in the chat box on screen, if you can type in, for you, are you being interrupted by urgent request, or do you have any rework request that is interrupting your schedule?
pretty much every company I've ever gone into has some degree of interruption to their schedule.
Absolutely.
The amount of just...
Yeah, I haven't had anyone answer that particular question. They may not know where the chat box is on screen. But you're right, Malcolm, that a lot of businesses do have those interruptions, and it could be as simple as the business owner, and I hear this from business owners all the time, my team or my staff keep interrupting me. I feel like I can't sit for more than 5 minutes before someone walks into my office and asks me a question. So how would you deal with that particular situation?
Well, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because if you've got the here and now that you need to deal with, but then you've got the longer term discussion that needs to take place of how we improve this going forward. Right here and now, you may well simply have to react to the request that's being made. If you have a big customer who's going to shut down an operation because you haven't provided what you needed to in a timely manner, then your hand is to some degree forced. But what you can look at doing going forward is the things we've been talking about so far of improving that turnaround time, so that by the time your customer realises they need it, they've actually already got it. And I can tell you it's very satisfying to be able to say to a customer who's on the phone, "Where's my stuff?" to be able to answer them with, "If you have a look in your yard, sir, you'll find we delivered that yesterday." It's just one of my little bents, but I found that very enjoyable.
Yes, and I've often heard some business owners say, well, they simply just ask the question back to their team member, so what do you think? And that puts the emphasis back on them to try to answer their own question.
Yes, and that also is an interesting one, because you need to be very careful as a leader that you do in fact lead, and while it's important to get input from your staff and to value their contribution, it's also important not to be seen that you've got no clue and you're just fobbing off the problem to somebody else. So that one does need to be handled a little bit carefully from a human relations point of view. Again, the more you engage with your staff over a period of time, the more respect you should have, and the more you can feed those questions back. And there will be cases where sometimes you will turn and say, "Look, I really don't know how to deal with this. What do you think?" And if you're being open and honest is really the only course of action on some occasions, but in order to maintain your credibility, you do need to, in fact, still be leading these conversations on the longer term.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a case study there. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about this one. Again, this is a manufacturing example, and for those of you not in manufacturing, I apologise for that, but the basic theory behind this does apply. If it's not entirely clear how it would apply, then please forward some questions through to Jacqui, and we'll endeavour to answer them shortly. So this particular example, we were making, or the company was making a product that was a very big, bulky product. The product group ranged in size from 3 feet long up to 14 feet long, and the operation needed to accommodate product in this whole range. It was taking, I've said there in the example, 2 weeks, but many times it was as much as 4 weeks in order to get product from start to finish through this process. And this was not an uncommon situation, and in fact I see this all the time as I go around and visit different companies that are looking to improve but don't really quite know how, and you have a look. And in this particular case, we looked at the actual work content involved, and there was probably a couple of hours worth of actual work that needed to be done in order to transform the raw materials into the finished product, and yet it was taking a number of weeks to do that. And this is very common. When we started to look at it, we started finding things we could improve. In this particular example, I needed to get the engagement of the staff before I was able to really do any real improvement. And so as a result, it took quite some time. But by working with the staff on the ground, we made progress. And I started in that instance with just cleaning the place up. And we said, okay, so we're just going to remove everything that doesn't need to be here. And stuff that does need to be here, we're going to mark out spaces for it. Some of you may have recognised this as the start of a 5S implementation. We then went on and started looking at the jigs they had to use, and they didn't work. They had all sorts of bits that were broken, so we started fixing those up. And I used to hear things like, oh, nothing ever happens around here. So we put a sign up on the wall, filled it out in detail with every possible conceivable improvement that the guys would like to have. And then we started working our way through it. And as we did, the team started to see that we're actually serious about making things better. And so the quality of the improvement suggestions started to get better, and the level of engagement started to improve. Before long, we in fact closed down one of the welding bays and relocated a drilling jig table fixture into what used to be one of the welding bays. We had something like 5 days worth of cut stock off the saw sitting on trolleys in front of the bender. We introduced some restrictions on build, theory of constraints for those that are familiar, and this mountain of trolleys disappeared. This then meant that we were able to physically move more freely. We put up some additional shelving over the saw and built a process around the restocking of that, which allowed us to swap between cutting one product and another product a great deal more efficiently, which then in turn meant that instead of trying to cut one product to satisfy the next 10 orders, we could cut the product just for one order. Again, this was leading towards what we call in lean manufacturing single piece flow, and it had a dramatic effect. This first round took us down to, it took us a few months, I'll be honest, but it got us down to around 3 days turnaround, which was quite remarkable. We then went the next level again, and we introduced a pull system, which you may have recall I mentioned just briefly earlier on, so that the customer would actually dictate at the end of each day what they need the following day. We used a thing called a Jacqui box, which is a load leveling tool to determine what product would be made next, and the common parts were pulled through and with Kanban replenishment, which again I'm starting to use a bit of jargon, so I apologise for that. Essentially, we did a lean transformation that allowed the product to be pulled through the factory a lot more efficiently than it was before, and by only working on the product that actually needed to be made, we didn't waste lots of time making things that weren't needed, which sounds bizarre. Why would you do it? And yet that's what most factories do. The net result of all of that was we got the lead time down to 1 day, so that whatever went onto that scheduling board, the Jacqui box, in the evening was then made during the course of the next day and put into the store at the end of that shift, where the store still had time to dispatch it the same day. So a dramatic improvement, and interestingly enough, not overly difficult. It's something that you can do in most organisations, particularly if you haven't already been down the lean path. I should try and associate this more with an office environment for you. So you may have a form that needs to be filled out. Maybe it's a credit request form. So you've got a new customer that salesmen have found they want to bring on board, and so there's a number of steps you need to go through, and the customer needs to be checked out, their credit history needs to be checked, whether they have a track record of paying on time wants to be looked at, where they are geographically, how many outlets, and so on and so forth. There are a whole range of different aspects you want to look at, and you may well find that in your particular organisation this means that there's 2, 3, 4 different people that need to be involved at different steps in that process. If what happens is the request comes in and it sits in somebody's in tray, and then that individual does a bit of work and then they put it in the in tray of the next person where it sits for a few more days. It's not uncommon for this to take a couple of weeks to get through the process. but the actual work content might be only 20 minutes. So there's a number of things that you can do, and one of the things that I saw done a little while ago that worked really very well was a set of clear plastic little boxes were put up on the wall in order of the operations, and once a week, if there were 4 people included, then once a week those 4 people would collect in front of these boxes and they would progress each item through, and because they were all there together, all the wait time in between was eliminated because they could do it right there and then and progress from start to finish. Now that meant that it was still taking 1 week to get through, but what that particular company found was that this was actually quite an acceptable result because it was now predictable, and people knew that every week on the same day the 4 would come together to progress it through, and so they were fine. Just occasionally one would need to go through faster, and so an individual was able to walk it through past those 4 people, which is similar to what would have happened anyway. But it just streamlined things and made it simpler, and it meant that all 4 of those people didn't have an overflowing in tray of outstanding work, and just once a week they'd get together for 15 minutes and they would progress these things from start to finish. And it just made everyone's life easier and more predictable.
So Malcolm, it seems like some of the solutions that you've been working with your clients with, they are really simple solutions, so they don't have to be complex. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. Why do you think that business owners and their teams are unable to come up with some of those things on their own? I mean, surely some of them can, and maybe they are, but why is it that that a lot of businesses just put up with these issues that occur in their business? So maybe, they're not delivering on time, or maybe the quality is low, or there are those issues that are preventing them from improving their business.
Absolutely, and that's an excellent question. I get asked that quite a lot, actually, and the common thread answer seems to be that people just don't think of it. They don't realise that it's possible to make dramatic improvement without spending lots of money or buying new equipment, and so they don't go looking for it. And if you don't go looking for it, you won't see it. That's like the new car analogy, where you go looking for a new car and you suddenly start to see them everywhere on the road that you go, where you never used to notice them. And it's just because you're looking for them. And it's the same in business. When you start to go looking for improvements, you'll start to see all sorts of things that can be improved. When you start to look at waste, in lean manufacturing they talk about the 7 wastes, which is commonly referred to now as the 8 wastes, but people like to play with their things. But you have this idea that there is non-value-adding activity that takes place in every business every day all the time. If you actually go looking for it, you will see it, and it's everywhere, and it's just staggering sometimes the amount of waste that you can find. But if you don't actually stop and go looking for it in the first place, you won't see it. And I really think that that's probably the single biggest hindrance, is that people just don't even think to go looking for it.
Okay, great. And okay, I'm just going to move on to the next slide. So okay, so we're coming towards the end of the presentation. So Malcolm, you have a special offer for the listeners on the training today, and so you're an expert business operations, or actually you're a process engineer, so you help to reduce time of delivery within businesses, and so what you're offering is an expert business operations review, and that, actually, can you just tell me a little bit more about that? What does that actually include?
Sure. So yeah, an operations review is something that we put together a little while ago, where we come out and visit site, and essentially we look at the sorts of things we just talked about today in this webinar, and we go looking for the sorts of opportunities that are there which can be done or need to be done. So the review itself has got, at last count, 43 different questions spread across 9 different categories, which just help you to ask the right questions of how well your business is going. Most people, when they do this, go, oh, well, I thought I was better than that. And that's fine. That just means that they're now aware of a whole lot of opportunities that they weren't aware of before. That is, they've started to learn to see. So what we do with this review is we come out, we actually get you to fill those questions out before we get there. And we have a walk around and a talk about your business and where you see your strengths and weaknesses. Once that's completed, I then put together a report which summarises what we've talked about. It usually includes a few improvements that you can make yourself by, on your own without assistance that will start you down the track of a lean transformation if you want to go the whole way, but certainly it'll start you down the track of continuous improvement.
Okay.
Sorry, and then the questions get turned into a numerical score that just helps to make the whole thing a little bit more objective rather than me saying, oh, geez, you should do that better. But I say, well, here you can see how you've gone because these are your answers. And if you need help with solving some of these, then obviously we're on hand to do that. In many cases, a lot of the improvements you can in fact do yourself.
Okay, great. So that sounds like it's a really valuable exercise to go through that questionnaire process and then get your insights from that. So you have offered this business operations review to the first company for free. The second one has a 75% discount. The third one is a 50% discount, and then the fourth one 25% discount. And it's a first in, first served basis. So if you email malcolm@kissopsconsulting.com, obviously if you're the first person, then you're obviously going to get that free. So you should try to be the first person. And so you said that's valued at $990 Australian, and that it does include the written report. So what about on screen it says that there's a physical on-site visit, but there's also a virtual on-site visit. So how does that work for businesses in other, that are located around the world?
Certainly. So the ideal is that you're on site and you can actually walk around and see what's going on for yourself. Mm-hmm. Due to geographic limitations, what we often do is have a Skype call where someone walks around the factory with their iPad, and we're connected on Skype so we can talk and they can aim the camera of the iPad around their factory and we can have a look at what's going on. Smaller companies find that's fine. Some of the bigger companies may in fact say, look, just get yourself on a plane and come over. There's obviously some additional costs for that, but that's certainly something that we do. So yeah, the virtual on-site tool just means you take your phone or your iPad and you provide my eyes for me as we walk around and talk about what's going on in your factory.
Great. Okay, so now we're going to move on to questions and answers. So thank you very much for your information today and your expertise, Malcolm. There's some new things that I learnt there. If anyone has some questions, if you can pop those into the chat box and ask those, and then I'll be able to ask Malcolm directly. One of my questions, Malcolm, is a poker yoker device. What is that?
Yes. Okay, so poker yoke device. In lean manufacturing, like in any business, they like to have all their own little jargon, and poker yoke's just one of the lean bits of jargon. It's another name. It's like a go, no-go gauge. A poker yoke device is something that makes it physically impossible to do the wrong thing. So in the case of a die in a press, it might be a pin that sits up in the air, and if you put the product in the right way, then the hole in your product sits down over the pin, and if you put the product in the press the wrong way around, the hole doesn't line up with the pin, so it doesn't hit down flat, and you've got an immediate indication that you've put it in the wrong way. The operator then pulls it out, turns it over, puts it in the right way, and nobody ever knows that a mistake was made. And so that's a poker yoke device to capture the error and prevent it from going any further.
And so that could happen, you could use that not only in manufacturing but in other scenarios. So for example, if you're using software as part of your day-to-day work, then maybe the system doesn't allow you to go further. For example, you can't go to the next screen unless you've entered the right information. Would you say that's correct?
Absolutely. And Absolutely, and conditional formatting is in fact a form of poke grab, because you're saying if you don't give me the information that I've asked for in the right format, then I'm going to assume you're telling me the wrong information. For example, if you try and put a telephone number into a date field, it's common for the software to say, well, you haven't given me a date, try again. And that's just an error-proofing device that's been built into the software in order to try and ensure that you provide the correct information.
Yes.
So absolutely, that's right.
And so I hear the term lean thrown around a lot these days. And so there's lean manufacturing and then there's lean management. What's the difference between the two?
Yeah, it is an interesting question. Lean itself is really, it's a philosophy. Lean it's an exercise in driving out waste. It's an exercise in focusing on value to the customer. And whether you call it lean management or lean manufacturing or lean startup or any one of the other forms of jargon, it's really all just taking this idea of driving out waste and providing value in a more effective way. And there's other things, there's Six Sigma, then there's Lean Six Sigma, now they've got Argyle, and they're all trying to achieve the same basic thing, which is to complete the value-adding steps without all the non-value-adding steps in between.
Okay, great. And before you mentioned the 7 waste, and now it's the 8 waste, can you explain or give some examples of what some of those waste that do occur within business?
Sure. So the waste, there's many categories. I'm going to talk for hours on each one, but some of the obvious ones are if you don't make enough product, then in a way that's waste because you've wasted the opportunity of supplying your customer. If you make too much product, that's overproduction, and so now you've spent resources making a product that you've now got to spend more money putting in a store just in case somebody actually wants to buy it. You can have wasted motion insofar as a person's doing a given operation and if they have to reach too far or if they have to pick up something and put it down and pick it up again and put it down, then that takes longer than just picking it up at once, completing the operations and putting it down. They talk about waste in terms of people's skills and education, because if you have a person who has a whole host of skills and you don't utilise those skills, then you're in fact wasting an opportunity that you've got there at your fingertips, and that's the 8th waste that they've added in.
Okay.
Sorry, you were going to say?
Yeah. So the example of where you may have a team member that's picking up an item and placing it down, and it's picked up again and placed down again. Obviously, that's an inefficient way of working. I see even in the one business sometimes you have different team members all doing the same job, but they're doing it in different ways. And sometimes the manager thinks, well, it's okay for them to do it in their own way. That that's just the way they work. Is that okay? Like, should we have a standard way or a way to help reduce or to make their or the way they do that particular function in a much more efficient, standardised way?
Yeah, absolutely. It needs to be standardised. What happens when the person goes on holidays or retires or for whatever reasons is not present? If you've got one person who is doing it consistently faster than another person, you want to understand what it is they're doing differently so that you can capture that gain and spread it across everybody else doing the same function. So again, you need the standard way. Standard way, there's no reason why you can't get everyone together and come up with better ways and then adjust your standard to reflect the new best way. But there should be a accepted best way, and that needs to be a standard, and everybody needs to work to that standard. Mm-hmm. One of the challenges that most businesses have is they either don't have a standard because they want people to feel free to explore new ways of doing it, or they do have a standard but they haven't figured out how to convince people they're still allowed to challenge the standard. And that's where it's important to build a culture where people feel comfortable to challenge what's going on around them, but also understand it's important that they follow the standards until such time as the new way is accepted.
Absolutely, and so there's that element of You don't want to be too bogged down in bureaucratic ways of working the same way, because businesses today are just changing at a rapid rate, and we all need to be innovating and looking at new ways of doing things in our business. So, so thank you for mentioning that. Earlier you mentioned theory of constraints. What is that theory? What is that about?
Well, so when theory of constraints is essentially, particularly an example I gave, it's just saying that instead of having an operation that just goes hell for leather making as much product as they can to a schedule they've got, they actually are limited in what they can build based on what the next operation actually requires and or can consume. So you can imagine one operation that has a cycle time of 1 minute being followed by an operation that has a cycle time of 2 minutes, and that first operation is going to make twice as much product as what the second operation can consume. So theory of constraints just says to the first operator, once you have made your product, I'm not going to allow you to make the next one until the one you've made has then been taken to be used by the second operator. So the first response then is that the first operator says, well, I'm standing around doing nothing. And then when you stop and think about it a little bit more, you can say, okay, so now you've got an opportunity where you can add some value somewhere else. And that may be in the form of adding some operations into, adding some steps into that first operation. It may be taking a little bit of workload off the second operation to put it into the first operation in a form of line balancing. Or it may be that the first operation has some other activities that they can do. But there's absolutely no value in spending resources making product that's not actually needed. And worse than that is if you make product and what you're making is defective for whatever reason, then by the time you realise at the second operation you've got defective product, you've actually got twice as much defective product that has to be either reworked or thrown away. And so this is one of the classic forms of waste as well.
And Malcolm, you keep using the phrase, the term product. Product also represents services, doesn't it?
It does, yes. Sorry, that's my manufacturing background coming out. But a product can be a service. It can be a form that's flowing through an office. The product could be delivery of services in a hospital to a patient. It's whatever it is that is the value-adding activity that your firm provides is what I'm referring to when I talk about product. If there's people listening today who really don't quite understand how that relates to what they do, then please send me an email with some particulars on what you're doing, and I'll try and explain that for your particular example.
Okay, well, thank you for answering those questions, Malcolm. We don't have any other questions through the chat box at the moment. So as Malcolm said, if you have any questions about some of the topics that Malcolm has introduced us to today, then email him at malcolm@KISSoperating, or actually it's kissopsconsulting.com.au. You're also welcome to email the support team at WayWeDo, which is support@waywedo.com. Malcolm, is there anything else that you want to add today? Is there anything else that you want to finish off with?
I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for listening, and encourage you to actually take some action. The hardest step is the first step. Once you get going, you start to realise it's really not that hard, and it's actually quite exciting when you start doing simple things that make a big difference. So please take the first step.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Malcolm, and thank you for everyone who has attended today. We are going to be sending out the recorded version of this training session within the next 1 to 2 days, so look for that in your inboxes. And yeah, and I hope everyone has a great day or great evening wherever you are based. So thank you again for your time. Thanks, Malcolm. See you everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jacqui.